How do you build lean evangelists versus paid profits? Right. A paid prophet will tell you anything you want to hear to keep making a profit.
Yeah.
Right. A lean evangelist is going to spread the truth about what's working and if it's real or not. And that's when you build your culture of lean evangelists.
Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban, and welcome to episode 298 of the podcast. It's January 30th, 2018. Joining me again today is Billy R. Taylor. This is part two of a discussion that we started in episode 293. Last week, a friend texted me and said he couldn't wait for part two of this discussion. He said he literally pulled off the road to take some notes while he was listening to part one. So without further ado, here is part two. Here we discuss extreme ownership, why Billy says creating ownership is more important than forcing accountability, and other important lessons he's learned and shared along the way. Again, Billy is currently the Director of Commercial Off-Highway and Support Manufacturing North America for the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. He moved up through the leadership ranks, including time spent as a plant director at facilities in Oklahoma and North Carolina. The Oklahoma facility won the prestigious Shingo Prize for excellence in manufacturing. So if you want to find links to different books and things we talk about here, you can go to leanblog.org/298. I really enjoyed what Billy has to say. I think he's particularly quotable, and there are a number of links there if you'd like to tweet and share some of the things that he said. We try to make that easy for you to do. But again, you can go to leanblog.org/298. I heard it was a podcast somebody in Finland does. He was talking with the retired General Stanley McChrystal from the U.S. Army. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with his book, Team of Teams.
Yes, I am.
And in the podcast, General McChrystal was talking about the idea of sharing information within special ops and within the military. And he said they were trying to change the culture. This idea of keeping information secret was counterproductive. He talked about having to share information with the frontline troops and leaders and trusting them to make decisions based on that information. And the interviewer asked, what about leaks and things have been made public? And General McChrystal said that, the leaks didn't really hurt that much. And I think the implication was them not sharing information internally would have hurt a lot more. So it sounded like he was willing to accept some of that risk that might be perceived from information sharing. And I think it's interesting to think about parallels to organization. People might say, I can't share our financial data with the employees. But, I think back even, a good example from GM 20 years ago, there was one department manager that sort of tried to help the frontline employees think of their department as a business. He would basically post revenue numbers based on production throughput and costs of labor and cost of poor quality, and he was trying to share more information, which was that was not the norm for that GM culture.
Mm-hmm. And I've had that personal experience sharing data. I think my assistant said to me once upon coming into this job, Billy, you share too much. And I asked, why do you say that? In the past, your predecessors would never talk about these things. And that was interesting. And we'll go back to those three approaches, right? Define winning. I'll give you an example. I went to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and there's a lot written about the transformation there. Within 6 months, we went from 31,000 to 38,000 tires a day. And no one thought that was possible. But more importantly, we worked, I think it was around 2% less hours to get that mass production. And so I remember when I went there, I went to night shift first, and I asked my vice president, could I not sit in the chair for 2 weeks? I like to go assess the situation. I want to seek to understand before I seek to change. And so when I went there, he asked me, so why would you do that? I said, because I have to earn the right to change. And he said, what do you mean? I said, there's two rights. There's the cultural right and the technical right. To earn the technical right, that's just a complete set of vital resources. People, do they have enough people, tools and processes? And it's a key contributor to building and sustaining a successful culture. People have to have the technical things they need to do the job. And once the leader provides that, he's earned one of the rights to change. Now, I can't just say I gave you a new piece of equipment, you should be doing better. Now comes the cultural right. And that's the rights for everyone, all right? It's whether alone or in a team, to express one's identity and to assess cultural references as necessary resources. And what is that? That's the ethical standards, the moral standards, the respect for the natives. And culture is a key element in the process of development and transformation. Mm-hmm. And once I earn those two rights, people start to buy in with what you're doing. So what happens once I realized they didn't know what winning was? And so what right did I have to basically ridicule the results when no one even knew what winning was?
Right.
So here's what's interesting. I asked, what's the favorite sport in this community? And they said, our football team, Billy. And I said, great. So I go to my controller. I said, I want you to order 3,000 football jerseys. He says, football jerseys? I said, yes, and I want the number 38 on the front. And I want you on the back where normally a player's name, I want you to add the choice. Mm-hmm. The choice. And I said, in the front, put Fayetteville. I said, Billy, people are not going to wear these jerseys. I don't want them to wear the jerseys. I want them to understand what 38 means.
Yeah.
Because they're going to tell me how we're going to get there. Bottom line, everybody wore those jerseys. We saw them in churches. We saw them in Walmart. We saw them at football games. And more importantly, what was the first question asked? What does 38 represent? Mm-hmm. That's our ticket to meet our customer demand. Now, the process of getting there, I had the buy-in. And it was interesting. We used that as a tool to define winning.
Yeah.
And in 6 months, they were at 38,000. And I remember going back to visit, but 3 years later, after I left the facility, the whole plant lined the aisles wearing the 38 jerseys. They lined the aisles, and they said, Billy, what you gave us was ownership. And they said, Billy, here's the funniest part of the story, was the guard came to me and said, Mr. Taylor, I want to get in on the process, and I want to post here at the guardhouse whether we're winning or not. Everybody walks by this guardhouse to go to work every day, from waste, quality, cost, delivery, and I want to put that up there. And Billy, here's my suggestion idea, because I would like my shirt. He says, anyone that comes to visit our plant for a tour, they have to get a tour admission card from me. Now, the only way I'm going to allow them to exit the building if they give me 3 improvement suggestions for our plant. And then I'll let them out. I said, unless they're from corporate headquarters, you let them out right away. And he starts laughing. But look at the extreme ownership, even at the guard. Everybody had bought into the process because they were engaged into it.
And when you get people bought in, I mean, you set a goal, and a lot of times people react to a goal by telling you all the reasons why they can't do it or why the goal is impossible. How do you steer the conversation toward the positive of how do we accomplish a goal?
Simple. For me, tell me what do you need to deliver it, and then let's decide whether we can give you that or not. So don't tell me basically what you cannot do. Tell me what you need to deliver, what the expectation is, and then we'll go from there. In most cases, you get excuses. Mm-hmm. And you have to step out of your comfort zone as a leader when that person says, well, I need A, B, and C, then the conversation moves. So if I help you obtain A, B, and C, we'll deliver the expectations. Well, Billy, I can do it with this. But it's that conversation where you transfer ownership. Right? Because people are going to put those excuses up there, and you have to change the tone of the discussion around what is it you need to deliver the A versus there's no way I can deliver A.
Right.
And if and what becomes evident sometimes, the people don't know what they need. So you have to create that process, and we have what's called model machines, and so we build a standard around a machine, and we call it process prove it, process trust it, process challenge it, then process replicate it, and that's the cycle where the machine keeps getting better, but you have to earn the right to keep changing. And in most cases, some operator says, we can't do it. Our machines can't do that. Well, once we created the model machine, the team was assessing what they needed to be successful.
Right.
And again, ownership went to the floor versus to Billy Taylor. Billy Taylor moved into the meeting as an enabler, and I was working for the team. They weren't working for me.
Yeah.
And so we've had tremendous success, not only at the shop floor level, but with my senior leadership team.
Right.
And it moves around setting clear expectations, the clarity around what winning is. What's that clarity? What is the clarity around that piece of it? It's critical. It is critical, and I think it's just been instilled in me. But beyond lean was when I was a pretty decent athlete when I was a young kid, and I was in the 8th grade, and I played for a football team that were in the city championship for the first time in school history. And I was a star player. And my mother came to me prior to the start of the season and set expectations. And she said, if you make anything less than a B, you can't play. And a week before the city championship game, grades came out, and I'd made a bad grade. At that time, they called them marks. I'd made a bad mark. And my mother called me in the house, and she says, I have this report card, and I see where you made an F. And I said, yes, ma'am. She says, creatively, you tried to change the F to a B with this ink pen. and so she says, you're off the team. And I remember saying, Mom, we're playing for the city championship. She says, understood. That was your plan. And so the principal shows up, the athletic director shows up. Everyone, the coaches, and I can hear her voice right now telling that coach, if you're here to speak to me about the B, you're welcome to stay. But if you want to talk about football, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And he says, Billy could play in the NFL someday. She says, mister, until that bad grade remains on his report card, she says, if NFL's in his house means not for long will he be playing.
Yeah.
And I didn't play. We lost the game 54-0. It was the best thing she ever did for me. What did she do? She changed the standard. She changed the standard in a household. And I was recently looking at a baseball coach, and he wore a baseball plate around his neck. And what was the baseball plate symbolizing? He said to the audience who thought he was going senile wearing a baseball plate around his neck, he said, this represents a standard. This baseball plate is 17 inches. When Babe Ruth played baseball almost 100 years ago, the plate was 17 inches. Derek Jeter, the plate is 17 inches. Aaron Judge, the new Yankee hero, the plate is 17 inches. If you play Little League Baseball, the plate is 17 inches. High school, 17 inches. College, 17 inches. Now, what changes is the distance from the plate based on age.
Right.
So if you have a pitcher that can't get that plate over the 17 inches, do you widen the plate? No.
It's the standard. Yeah.
It's the standard. If you widen the plate, you're going to get dark days ahead. And it's like a lean journey. What's the standard? That's the governance piece. What's the standard? And often people want to negotiate the standard versus staying within 17 inches.
Well, and it sounds like the right thing, the best thing for you over the long term was to hold to the standard on the grades. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some of my principles, my core values and principles, they're around, I have a standard of how I treat people. If you get within 2 feet of me, I shake your hand. It's called a 2-foot rule. Mm-hmm. Okay? I have a process even in meetings. Who's going to be talking? Even in my leadership team, if I'm not at a meeting with my staff or my plant managers, the meeting starts without me. It's not my meeting. It's our meeting. And they know the golden rule. And I was recently speaking at Industry Week, and I had an event where I was down checking my sound system, and we were going to do a workshop with my staff to prove our processes. And immediately after that, I was going to do the opening keynote. Well, my sound didn't come up, and they couldn't get the video teed up. And so I'm sitting there. Unbeknownst to me, it's 5 minutes after, and our session for the workshop was supposed to start, and I was supposed to kick it off. My leadership team looks at each other, and they say, "Wait a minute, what's the rule? We better get started."
Yeah.
They started the presentation without me, and they got a standing ovation. And it was the extreme ownership. It's that, but it's a standard.
Right.
Right? Do you do what you say, and say what you do?
On the topic of winning, can you talk a little bit about what it was like to go through the Shingo process to receive the silver medallion? That was back in Oklahoma. Is that right?
That is correct. That was outstanding. That was the game changer for me. It was a standard around functions and tiers, right? And so I call it managing the intersections. It gave me a process to tie in systems, tools, and processes. It gave me processes to build a culture for sustainment. And going through that, at one point, it was very difficult, very challenging. We had to get outside of our comfort zone. But midway through, we realized we weren't doing it for the award. We were doing it for the process. And what people don't know, the score at that time to win the actual Shingo prize was a score of 775. They no longer give scores today. We scored 774.
Oh.
Yes. So the difference from a Shingo silver medallion to a Shingo prize was 1 point. Now, that was a blessing to us. At that point, we realized, again, it wasn't about the prize, it was about the process. Right? And even in our organizations, winning, it's not about the prize, it's about the process. The prize is going to come. And going through the journey, what was the valuable part of the Shingo prize was the process and the governance around it. There was some strict governance around what you should be doing. Now, it allowed us to operate within our own native culture. However, but it gave us a process. And I still use that process today. And it's not, and I learned a lot around how to use 5S. I learned a lot about how to use Plan, Do, Check, Act. I learned a lot about the aspect of recognition as a leader and how to deploy that leadership and ownership to others on my team. And essentially, I coined it as power, right? Power is at its maximum potential when it's given away, not when it's expressed.
Yeah. And in your role now as senior manufacturing executive, I imagine you're still teaching and using those principles, even if plants are no longer going through the formal process to try to get the prize. Is that right?
Absolutely. Actually, when I show up for a plant visit, I deploy the same technique I used as a plant manager. Right, define, align, execute. But when I get to a plant, I often start with a session with the leadership team in a closed room, and that normally lasts for about an hour or so. And at that point, I make an announcement. I no longer want to speak to you for the rest of this visit. I don't want to hear from you. I want to now hear from the people. Let's hit the shop floor.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see people come to the forefront. And I learned that from going through the Shingo process as well, through the audit process, right? I'm in the room, but I could not talk. I could not express what I thought. It was what the people thought, because that's what reality really was.
Right.
What they were expressing. So when I go to the shop floor, I mean, you get to interact with the people. They're the true owners, right? When we're sleeping at night, they're the ones that are running the business. And so I deploy the same process, and I bring 2 or 3 plaques and probably 15 coins. And what I do is I recognize people with a coin. We do a selfie. We call them ussies. We take ussies, and people want the ussies, and we have fun. Actually, through the presentations that we give on the floor, and people now volunteer. I mean, they're backlogged with people wanting to give presentations. And recently, in one of my plants, I went to the plant, and the hourly people came to me. This is a unionized workforce, and says, "Mr. Taylor, if possible, will you extend your trip 1 extra day? We have some other things we'd like to show you, and we'll come in on our day off." And what do I extended my trip. Right? Remember, make people visible; they'll make you valuable.
Yeah.
And so it's the same process. When I go to the plant, I mean, my deployment process, I hear for the executive leaders, and then I have a process where I go down into the organization for people to show me the process, not the prize, the process, not the records, the process. Show me the process you use to obtain the record.
Is there any other sort of key lesson learned that that you would want to share with the listeners?
Yes, and I think it's the most important piece of the message is failure is part of the process. And failure is never final if you look at it as opportunity, but it's part of the process. And at that point, how do you re-engage? How do you re-engage and versus looking at failure as final? But I encourage leaders to embrace the fact that there are going to be bumps in the road, and failure is just a part of the process. And you have to embrace that.
I think there's a difference, when you have leaders that allow people to give up as opposed to coaching them to move forward. If people say, well, we tried 5S and nobody was participating. We tried lean and it didn't work here. It's sad to see people give up on something when they hit very predictable bumps in the road, right?
Right. One of my facilities, we were really struggling, and I actually spent a week in the plant, and failure was really destroying the plant. And it's funny you use a 5S model. I actually went to a Home Depot and purchased a hand broom, spray painted it gold, and I brought in a regular hand broom, and I said, okay, on Friday we're gonna award the golden broom. And we're going to award the broom of process. The golden broom was the highest ranked area from an audit from the 5S process. If you don't follow the 5S process, you can't be a candidate for the golden broom. The broom award is who made the most improvement. First thing they asked was, how do we get trained on 5S? They wanted to learn the process, and so it was like wildfire. And we awarded the broom, and we awarded the golden broom. Today, if you walk in that plant, you'd think we invested $20 million into it. And we've invested minimal. And they still, peers offer the golden broom to each other, and the winner of the golden broom is excluded from bringing something to the potluck. Everybody else has to bring something to the potluck. Yeah. But again, they bring the potluck in, so it's not costing anyone anything. They bring their favorite recipes in every quarter. And then and what was interesting, painting the front offices, the front office staff was given the opportunity to come in on a Saturday and work half the day cleaning up, and they were awarded a day off, a full day off of their choice.
Yeah.
Extreme ownership.
Right.
But failure is where we started. 5S doesn't work here. And that's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And then we put it in the context of, here's how we're going to sustain our workplace. People owned it. But as a leader, what did I have to do? The minute they asked me for money to pay a certified painter, if I had said, no, we don't have the funds to do that, what would it have done to the process?
Right.
It would have destroyed it. And so leadership has a responsibility to engage as well. Remember, I was working for them. They weren't working for me. And think about the process itself when people don't want to participate. How do you build lean evangelists versus paid prophets?
Right.
Right. A paid prophet will tell you anything you want to hear to keep making a profit.
Yeah.
Right. A lean evangelist is going to spread the truth about what's working and if it's real or not. And that's when you build your culture of lean evangelists.
Mm-hmm.
And when Billy Taylor left plants, they ran better when I left. They kept growing because they owned it the whole time.
And that's great to hear, because a lot of leaders move up through the ranks and don't leave a path of a trail of sustainability behind them.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
So I imagine you're also looking for that as you're evaluating your talent at different levels of leadership, of who's leaving a trail of sustainment and continued growth, as opposed to a trail of short-term flash-in-the-pan success, right?
That is correct. And actually, we have a process that you can actually see that. And the strategy deployment process, we call it 8-4-2-1. So at the one level, how do you know who owns your 8? So I have 8 people. They own $1 of my 8. At the next tier, I have 4. I have 2. So you have 4 people that are managing that level below that has a clear path to your 8 again, and so on. And so you know who owns what in the process, but it's visible. Mm-hmm. And so when we have our monthly MORE meeting, you can walk into our room. We recently had some high school students come into our facility, and we trained them on this process for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we allowed them to actually run our business. And the teacher in the room, literally and physically, she started crying. She couldn't believe she was watching these young kids run a Fortune 500 business, basically from a standpoint of actions to take. But the process is what drove that. And the process was getting to the lowest level of the organization. So you can see it in our meeting. And often if my safety or my quality manager initiative missed, I would say, so what facility caused you to miss? And he would say Plant 2. And if the Plant 2 leader's on the phone, so what department caused you to miss that caused us to miss? And then he would tell, and then the department representative would actually tell you the plan to correct it. And this all happens in the span of 15 minutes. The solution, everything, but you're at the lowest level. But so we have a process that says, are we aligned? From the senior level to the operator level, are we aligned? And you can actually see it.
Right.
So yes, it's critical. And developing people is critical, and and most times we get caught up in the source of the idea, right, versus the quality of the solution.
And one other thing that kind of stands out from the different stories you've told here, including the Golden Broom story, is the power of symbols. So there's a lot of talk about data, charts, measures, visual management, dogs barking at red numbers. There's facts and data. You're certified in Six Sigma, and there's math and statistics. But it seems like you've found there's a real power in not just recognition, but different symbols that people can relate to and sort of rally around. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir. And those symbols are they're mindsets more so than symbols. People can identify with them. It resonates. And it's when you leave the room, it's still there. And I'm not a big proponent of accountability, although it's extremely important that you have it. But what's more important is ownership. Mm-hmm. And those symbols, right? It triggers that mindset of ownership. Like the dogs. If I show you, look, here's our plant. Those two dogs, the person watching the sign, that sounds like us. That sounds like us. But you know what? Billy's not like that. We've got to bark at the red so that we can bring attention to it, so we can address it. So it's good. We get recognized for barking at the red because we're going to fix it. Not we're going to bark at the red and get beat.
Right. And I think that's the key difference. The dogs in that cartoon just bark, and things stay red because they're not being servant leaders. They're not helping people improve.
Right. So think about society. It goes back to exactly what you said. Symbols. So how fast should you drive? When should you stop? When is it appropriate to turn? When is it your time to go at the light? They're all symbols. So where do you go to order food when you walk in a restaurant? What do you look for? The cash register. You look for symbols. So how do you know what to order when you walk into a restaurant? What are you looking for? A sign or a symbol. It's the way we live. Mm-hmm. It's society. It's society. And, governance in America and in Australia. I was recently in Australia, and I was given a very, very critical lesson around visual management and how we have to make it obvious. And the person asked me, "So, Billy, where should I park?" I said, "Right there, at 4 spots." How do you know? Because the lines are there. Okay. What if the lines weren't there? Where would I park? Where should people walk, Billy? On the sidewalk. How do you know? Look at the sign. Right? So we live in a society of signs.
And visuals, yeah.
And visuals.
Yeah.
It's what stimulates us.
One other question I wanted to ask you. I saw a presentation that you gave online, and I'll link to this in the blog post for the episode. And you talked about this formula for winning: trust, defining what winning means, creating alignment, executing. Really, really great model. And in that model, there's the words holds people accountable. You said you don't really. I was curious what you thought when you said you don't really. If I remember right, you don't really like the word accountability, or what does accountability mean to you? And is that the way people always use the word?
I believe accountability must be present, and I love accountability. However, accountability is not my focus. Ownership is. Ownership. Just think if this was let's look at a leader. When a leader rules with a hammer, and it's just accountability. When they walk out of the room, accountability goes with them. Ownership. I get you to own the results. Accountability now is organic. Mm-hmm. in the majority of the cases. And when I leave the room, accountability stays because you own it. You own it, and it's like my son, right? Alex, you missed your curfew, and this recently happened. And I walk in his room, my wife's upset, and I was hand me the keys. I said, for 30 minutes, you've blown your whole weekend. Give me the keys. It's your car. You own it. However, you violate the standard. Give me the keys. He's upset, and all of a sudden, I'm not fair. I'm not fair, Alex. Now, 2 weeks ago, at approximately 11:45, I hear disarm. He walks in the house. I'm reading, and he says, I have to go say hi to Mom. He walks in, kisses his mother. He comes back. He says, Dad, I have to tell you the story. And I says, what happened, son? He says, son, he says, Dad, we're at this engagement. We're having fun. We're dancing, and we're just having a great time. And this young lady and I are dancing, and I look at my watch, and it's 11:15, 11:20, and I know I have a 15-minute drive home. He says, Dad, she's probably still there dancing by herself. Because you know what? I was not going to blow my whole weekend and miss my curfew. Now, what happened? Was accountability there? Absolutely it was. But what was more present? Ownership. And the discussion we had after that around ownership was almost tear-jerking. His extreme ownership, his level of maturity now is organically happening, because of ownership. That's like a workforce. Mm-hmm. Ownership. When you look at safety and you say, well, listen, you can wear your PPE. Well, don't put your PPE on until you get to your workstation, and you can only use your cell phone if it's not on your machine. And what did you just do? You just widen the plate. You widen the plate. So why wouldn't you say, okay, when you walk into the front door, your personal protective equipment is required. If you go beyond this line, you have violated the process, because we care about your safety, and we believe nothing before safety. And cell phones are only permitted in this specific area. What did you do? 17 inches. Mm-hmm. Now, ownership now resides with whom? The individual.
Right.
Accountability now goes back to you get greater accountability now through ownership.
Right. Yeah. And I think situations like that, I think you articulate that really well. Accountability requires ownership. I've seen one definition of accountability that says, I think I heard you say this earlier. Do you do what you said you were going to do? And so coming home on time, putting your safety glasses on, there are things like that we have clear ownership of and control over. I think, unfortunately, and I hear this sadly a lot in healthcare, leaders will use the word accountability like a hammer.
Yes.
We're going to hold people accountable, which means basically it's a polite way of saying we're going to blame them for things that are out of their control. We're going to hold nurses accountable for the high infection rates when
that's right.
You might look at all sorts of problems in the system and understaffing and not having the right equipment available and housekeeping being understaffed and there's all these different, there's too much waste in the way. It's not just about staffing levels. And, I think, there are some situations where it seems unfair. Like you can hold a nurse accountable for showing up on time, but then there are a lot of things that seem to be just honestly out of their control.
That's right. And so what you do is we call it the box. You can't let people operate outside the box. And when you put people in the box, they organically, they being the people, they cut the box in half. Ownership cuts the box in half. Your level, your rate of success just improved 50% by putting people inside the box of ownership.
Yeah. Just look out for that blade as it's coming through and cutting the
That's right. That's right. That's the issue, though, right? And that's where governance comes in. That's where governance comes in. I mean, governance is, I believe it's critical.
I agree.
It's critical, right? If you walked in a bank right now and say, with a brown paper bag and say, fill it full of money, right now, I guarantee you will not walk out of that bank a free man. You don't even have to have a gun with you. Why? Governance.
Yeah.
Governance. And so I am a firm believer in governance. There's a book we just recently read called Extreme Ownership. It's a great book to read. But more importantly, and I'm going to end with an example. Once I was watching Alabama play, and I believe Nick Saban is a disciple for ownership, and people mistake that as a disciple for accountability or a disciple for coming down on people, and he's not. He's a disciple for ownership and process. They were up. They were playing a team, and I was watching it on television. They were up. They were winning the game by 28 points, and the lineman started to jump off sides, and Nick Saban, you could see him getting all over his offensive coordinator, Lane Kiffin. Mm-hmm. And they're up. And they asked him, what were you so upset about? He said, it's not that play, this game, that's going to hurt me. It's a mindset that when I'm in that big game, if that's okay now, it'll happen then when I don't need it to happen. And he says, we have a process.
He always talks about the process, yes.
The process, right? And what's interesting, I think 2 weeks later, Lane Kiffin's salary went from $740,000 to over $1 million. He was rewarding the process. And he's also showing to Lane Kiffin, when you become a head coach, do you expect what you get or get what you expect? Mm-hmm. Right? He wanted extreme ownership. He wants extreme ownership of the process. For a lineman, here's your job, own it. And it's a different mindset. He's building mindsets. And I would venture, and I'm not a betting person at all, but I'd be willing to bet you that Nick Saban finishes within the top 3 this year. Again,
he almost always does. But yeah, that process with Lane Kiffin went south last year in the week or two before the national championship game. Lane Kiffin once again has a head coaching job down in Florida, so it'll be interesting to see what lessons he learned from Nick Saban in that process. If Kiffin will be more successful than he was at Tennessee and USC.
USC, I agree. But Bill Belichick, they keep winning. They're not flashy about it. They're not Bill Belichick does not praise the individual. It's his process.
Yeah.
Bill Belichick takes average players and make great teams.
And think about that. He's got a all-time great in Tom Brady, because it's funny. I think of I know you're in Ohio. My dad's family was from the Youngstown area, and my grandmother, when she was still alive, was a big Cleveland Browns fan, and she used to complain about Bill Belichick when he was coach of the Browns. And it's I guess he figured some things out before he took the job with the Patriots.
Well, think about it. Or was it the Browns' leadership?
It could be
senior leadership.
Yeah,
right.
They haven't been successful without Belichick either.
There you go. And Belichick was successful before he went to Cleveland, and he's been successful after he left Cleveland.
Yeah.
And in the second piece of that, you referenced he has the great Tom Brady. But when was Tom Brady drafted?
Right.
If he was so great, right? Evidently, he wasn't so great then that he got drafted in the 6th round.
He was barely a starter at the University of Michigan. Yeah.
Right. So, but under Belichick, now he's the great Tom Brady.
Fair enough.
You follow what I'm following?
Yeah.
And so his process and those great receivers that came into his organization, like Randy Moss or a Chad Ochocinco, they did not flourish. And I'm not saying anything bad about either of those guys. By no means. I'm saying no one's bigger than the process. And those people, or those individuals, came from a system that recognized the individual versus a process that embraced the individual.
Well said. So I think we'll leave it on that note here. And I think I know you've given me, I'm sure you've given the listeners a lot to chew on, a lot to think about, kind of reflecting on their own lean journeys and leadership approaches. So, Billy, thank you so much for being so giving of your time and having, sharing so much with us here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark, and it's a pleasure, and thank you for allowing me to use the slide as well. You completed my presentation, sir.
I hope it's helpful. I hope the audience gets a kick out of it too, and thank you for finding that and appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.